Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are dialing in from. I hope you and your family are safe and well. A very warm welcome to the online webinar to launch the Social Innovation and Higher Education Landscape Report in 5 countries: Malaysia, Indonesia, South Korea, Philippines, and Vietnam. I'm Gum Chen from the British Council, and I will be the section manager today. I'm here with my colleagues, Tristan Ace, Global Lead, Partnership and Development, Social Enterprise and Inclusive, and Creative Economics, British Council, who will be your host today. Before we start, I would like to note on some of the housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded. Your submitted question along with your application will be selected to discuss at the Q&A section. In addition, you can submit questions in the Q&A chat box. Please state your name, organization, and country where you are in your question. After the event, we will share a summary report with everyone. We will post the Q&A box in the link to the webinar evaluation. The webinar evaluation survey. Your feedback is important to us, so we would like to hear from you, and by completing the survey after the webinar. Finally, please help us promote the event by using this hashtag. Now, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Tristan Ace. Over to you, Tristan.
Okay, thank you, Gam. And once again, welcome everybody. And thank you for joining us for the launch of the findings of our Social Innovation in Higher Education Landscape Survey across East Asia. As Gam said, we focused on the following countries: Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, and South Korea. Now, as many people will know, we're very well known at the British Council for supporting collaborative partnerships between UK higher education institutions and higher education institutions across East Asia. And of course, you may also be aware of the work we've done over the past 10 years in supporting social innovators and social entrepreneurs across the region as well, and strengthening the enabling environment within which they operate. So more recently, we focused our attention at the intersection between these two areas of work, higher education and social innovation, and launched a program of work which explores how we can strengthen the social innovation capacity within higher education institutions, both here in East Asia and in the UK. And we do this through forging institutional collaborations in research, teaching, knowledge exchange, and community engagement. Last year, we piloted a program in Hong Kong, which focused on developing a range of innovative research collaborations, and also delivered the very first piece of research that explored social innovation in higher education, which we launched last year. And indeed, that methodology and that report was the inspiration for the report that we're launching here today. So moving on to the launch event, we partnered with Northampton University in the UK last year to carry out a landscape survey of social innovation and social entrepreneurship across East Asia, which took place over the past year or so. And today's session will present the findings and key recommendations of that report. And it will also explore opportunities to strengthen social innovation capability with higher education institutions across the region as well. So we're delighted to have so many people registered for today's event. By the last count, I think we had over 400 participants registered from over 13 countries. We have representatives from higher education institutions, from government, as well as social innovators and social entrepreneurs themselves. So really a rich audience there, and we'll be looking forward to a question and answer discussion session after we've had a chance to hear the initial findings of the research. Before we go into talk about the research itself, I'm just going to invite one of our country directors to say a few words. So I'm delighted to welcome Sam Harvey, who's the country director for South Korea, to say a few words of welcome as well. So Sam, please, over to you.
Thanks, Tristan, and thank you to everyone who's taken the time to participate in this webinar. Just building on what Tristan has already said, as many of you know, the British Council's been working in social innovation and social enterprise across our global network, including East Asia, for over 10 years. Drawing on the UK experience in social enterprise, we've been engaging with different stakeholders, from existing social innovators to policymakers, to promote its growth around the world. And we've consistently shared our learning from this work through various insight reports, including the Think Global Trade Social publication, which looks at the critical role social enterprises can play in achieving the SDGs. Arguably, this has become even more important in the last few months as countries around the world grapple with the economic shocks of COVID-19 and the approaches being considered for recovery. A focus on inclusive growth and sustainable development seem even more important. As we develop platforms for collaboration across East Asia for social innovators and entrepreneurs to reach their ambitions and for the sector to thrive, we recognise the vital role that education plays in embedding and fostering entrepreneurship and social responsibility, and the importance of working with the higher education sector to highlight the impact of social enterprise education and research. With our regional partners, we therefore invested in undertaking research to help us better understand the role of social innovation in higher education in East and Southeast Asia, to appreciate the different approaches and funding mechanisms that exist, to analyse the challenges and barriers, and to identify opportunities for us to use this insight to support the development of an enabling environment for social enterprise and investment. This research and this report is the result, and we're delighted to be able to share it with you and hope you will consider it a valuable resource. Today, we're honoured to have renowned speakers from the University of Northampton and academics from the countries involved in the research, sharing their experience, their expertise and knowledge, and I hope opening up the first of many conversations and collaborations across the region. Thank you again for joining us today, and I look forward to further exchanges as we become more comfortable and confident in meeting virtually. Thank you. Over to you, Tristan.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you for that. Okay, so I'll just talk very briefly then about how the session will run for the next 90 minutes or so. I'm going to introduce our panelists in a moment, but we're going to invite, we're going to hear first of all the key findings of the research, and then we're going to hand over to a respondent from each of the 5 countries that have been involved in the research to hear their reflections on the key findings and recommendations, and hear a little bit about the work that they're doing as well to promote social innovation within higher education systems in their countries. So I'll introduce those panelists in a moment, and then after that there'll be an opportunity to present some questions to our panelists, so you can do that in the chat function. But we've also received many questions in advance of the webinar today, so I'll be picking some of those questions and finding some of the shared themes around those questions to put to our panelists later as well. At the end of the session, we'll hand over for some final reflections from our regional director of Society, Andrew Perlman, who I see is on the call here as well, before concluding the session at 6 o'clock Hong Kong time. But of course, that won't be the time wherever you are in the world, but in what is now about 60, 70, 80 minutes from now. So first of all, then, please allow me to introduce our distinguished panel. So we have from Malaysia, Pamela Ng, who is the manager at the Social Enterprise in Social Enterprise Accreditation and Partnerships at MAGIC, which is one of our key partners for many years in Malaysia, Malaysian Centre for Global Innovation and Creativity. Secondly, from Indonesia, we have Dr. Ari Magiano, who is the heads up the Centre for Innovation, Design and Entrepreneurship Research at the Binus University. Thirdly, from Korea, we have Professor Siwon Lee, who's the Director for Social Entrepreneurship at the College of Business at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. Then from the Philippines, we have Professor Edwin Salonga, who is both a social entrepreneur and academic. So he's what I think is often described as a pracademic. He is the chairperson of SEDP, which is a Social Enterprise Development Partnerships. He also lectures at the Ateneo de Manila University as well. And then in Vietnam, we are delighted to welcome Professor Thi Phon Lam, who is the president at the University of Social Sciences and Humanities at the Vietnam National University in Ho Chi Minh City. And then finally, we have our presenter, Professor Richard Hazenberg, who is at the Social Innovation Institute for Social, who is Professor of Social Innovation at the at the University of Northampton in the UK. Lots of social innovation there in his title, so I've got a bit tongue-tied. But he has been leading, or coordinating rather, the research project over the past year or so, and working with academic teams in each of the 5 countries to finalise the five reports, as well as the regional comparison report that we're publishing today. So in a moment, I'm going to hand over to Richard to talk through the findings. But before we do that, we're just going to share a very brief snapshot of the report. It's a 60-second video. So please, let's kick that off now, and then we'll hand over to Richard for his for the findings. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So I'm now going to hand over to Richard. So Richard, over to you.
Great, thank you, Tristan. Thank you for the introduction. And yeah, good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Richard Hazenberg. As Tristan introduced, I lead the Institute for Social Innovation and Impact at the University of Northampton in the UK, and I'm one of the lead researchers from the UK on this project. You can see that I'm also indebted to my colleagues, so Dr. Joan Rayu and Dr. Toa Giroletti for their support on this research. And also, whilst everyone else's names aren't on there, I'd really just like to say a big thank you to all of the local research teams as well across the 5 countries, without whom support and their work on their local reports, our overall regional report wouldn't have been possible. And in today's presentation, I'm going to very briefly talk you through some of the research findings and really try and focus in on what the key recommendations are out of the research. There's a lot of detail in the data that I invite and encourage you all to dive into in the reports, but obviously for time purposes we won't have time to go through all of that today. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. Hi. Okay, so just to give you a sort of overview of the research, basically the overall aim was for us to really understand what the social innovation landscape in higher education looked like in Southeast and East Asia, building on the work that we've already done with the British Council in Hong Kong that Tristan alluded to, but extending it to the 5 countries involved in this research. And specifically what we wanted to understand was really what the gaps were in academic knowledge in this field, the capacity and ambition of academics to engage in social innovation, and the constraints that wrap around that in terms of how they engage with their communities. But we also wanted to understand how those barriers were related to trust, being a key underpinner of partnerships and collaborations. We really wanted to understand how academic stakeholders perceived other stakeholders in the ecosystem in regards to trust. We also really wanted to understand how these barriers related to the key challenges that faced each country, and for obvious reasons we wrapped those challenges up in the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, really trying to understand how the research seeks to alleviate some of the problems that we see through the SDGs, and also support the mechanisms that the SDGs wants to see put in place to overcome some of those social problems. And obviously overall we wanted to produce recommendations that would be of use to the sector, both to academics and universities themselves, but also one more widely to government, funders, communities, NGOs, a really broad set of stakeholders that engage in the ecosystem. So if we could just go to the next slide, please. Hi. So just to give you an overview of the methodology, very briefly, we conducted an in-depth literature review. This is both in terms of the global context, so what were the seminal papers around social innovation in higher education, but then also at the local level. So the local teams supported us to map out academic publications, conference papers, practitioner and policy reports across the countries, both those that were available in English, but also those that were available in the local languages. We then utilised the information we got from these to build an online survey, which was distributed to academics only. And you can see we had 253 respondents from across the 5 countries, so a nice sample size for us to do some analysis with. And then we also engaged in qualitative work following on from the survey. This involved interviews and focus groups. We had 193 participants in total across the research, so huge amounts of data. And again, you can see why I'm so indebted to the local teams for their support with the analysis of this data. 193 interviews is a lot of material to go through. We also wanted to ecosystem map, so we started to try and build a picture of what social innovation courses and modules were out there, what were the funding streams and the policies in each country designed to support social innovation, and how could they be brought to bear in terms of developing research, teaching and knowledge exchange across the region. And then we triangulated all of that data together to produce the overall conclusions and the recommendations for the report. If we could just go to the next slide, please. Hi. So in terms of the main research tools, you can see here, and I won't dwell on this for too long, I really want to get into the results, but we have the survey, which focuses very much on capturing respondent demographics, so gender, age, academic position, the region of the country that they were based in. And then we actually asked the academics to provide us information on the key publications and research outputs that they've produced in relation to social innovation, but also the teaching activities that we're involved in, their perceptions of student experience around the curriculum and around social innovation teaching and learning, how they felt that their higher education institution was positioned within society and what government support was available for them. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that the levels of collaboration and trust that they had, we actually asked people to identify to us the collaborations they were engaged in and who they were with, as well as measuring their trust between different stakeholders. And again, we focused on the SDGs within the survey as well. In terms of the interviews, we went a little bit broader. So we didn't just focus on academics. We actually then also interviewed institutional leaders within universities. We interviewed policymakers and we interviewed practitioners, whether they be social innovators themselves or people working in social enterprises, for instance, or whether actually there were wider practitioners engaged in the ecosystem, such as those from NGOs. Okay, so I think we move on to the results now, please. Hi. So key findings, if we just go to the next slide, please, sorry. So in terms of the research, it's always easy for us to map out and identify what the barriers are throughout these projects, because of course there's barriers in every ecosystem. I can talk about lots of barriers that we face around social innovation in the UK, for instance, and the UK is usually held up as one of the perhaps more leading social innovation ecosystems. So I thought for each area, research, teaching and community, it would be quite nice to focus on some of the positives that came out of it. I think the first thing we have to say is that in terms of research, social innovation is a rapidly growing area. We're seeing a huge growth in the number of publications per year, 54% growth every year. So we're more than doubling the amount of knowledge that's out there in the form of publications every 2 years. You can see that we found 262 academic publications and 89 non-academic publications across the region, 351 in total. And really, when we looked at, I won't read out some of the quotes, but you can the italicized quotes on the slide, you can read those. But really what we were seeing is that there's a real key desire amongst academics to engage in social innovation research and to try and conduct research that is both theoretically cutting edge and internationally leading, but also actually has some practical relevance for their communities and the society that surrounds the university. But there are some barriers. I think perhaps one of the key ones, it won't be a surprise, that's funding. What we actually saw across the 5 countries was a significant amount of research that was basically either had no funding or was self-funded by the academics. So the academics were actually paying their own research costs to travel to places out of their own private personal resources. And particularly we see places like Vietnam, very, very high proportion of research that is funded in that way. So there's a real dearth of institutional and wider academic funding around research. And also in terms of the impact. So one of the key issues that were raised by stakeholders that were non-academics was perhaps this notion that too much academic research was still very blue sky, theoretical based, and didn't have enough relevance to communities and practitioners and to policymakers. So I think what we need to see in the coming years is a greater focus on applied research and impact focused research. That doesn't mean that it shouldn't be theoretically leading. It doesn't mean that it has to be watered down in terms of its academic quality, but finding ways to merge those two so that we actually have high quality research that delivers impact on the ground is, I think, a fundamental challenge for the sector, and not just in Asia. I think that's a challenge for social innovation research globally, to be honest. So if we move on to teaching next. So again, in the teaching area, we see good growth, 31% per year growth. 311 modules and courses were identified across the research. It must be said that the majority of those were modules. They weren't courses specifically focused on social innovation, rather they were modules embedded, modules on social innovation, but embedded in wider degree programs such as entrepreneurship or business management. But nevertheless, there was a great positivity around the impact that social innovation learning has in terms of creating students that are able to think broadly, to apply their thinking and their learning from university to wider contextual issues within society. And I think that that's really important. I come from a university that's focused very much on Ashoka changemaker values. And so we really see the need that the education of students isn't just about preparing them for the world of work or further study, but actually it's about creating a positive citizenship agenda for the next generation. And that sort of shows up in some of the barriers that we see. So we see a poor, generally limited quality, I should say, of curriculum across the 5 countries, somewhat limited by the accreditation processes that exist within universities. There's in many cases old-fashioned accreditation processes that don't look too favourably on innovative methods of teaching that perhaps aren't classroom-based. And I think we have a need to move away from teaching that is just delivered by lectures in the classroom to really supporting students to engage in a much wider field of learning in society. Place-based learning is what we call it in the reports. And there's also an institutional inertia perhaps sometimes around the level of proactivity that we see within universities. Now, understandably for university leaders, social innovation isn't always going to be at the top of their agenda, but actually my argument is that it should be. It's actually fundamental to everything a university does, and in some ways one could argue that universities are social innovation organisations or even social enterprises themselves in the work that they do. So to me, it's about also ensuring that we educate across the university spectrum on the importance of embedding social innovation research and teaching. If we could just move on to the community engagement slide, please, Hi. So again, we see a relatively positive number of community engagements, pretty much matching the sort of numbers of research projects and teaching and courses that we saw in the previous slides. And what we actually see across that is that some of the main collaborators in these community engagements are NGOs, schools, surprisingly, perhaps for me, I wasn't, certainly we don't have as much collaboration with schools around social innovation in the UK, so I thought that was a really interesting finding for the sort of Southeast Asian context, and to a degree public bodies as well. And you can see we've got the proportions of those collaborations across the countries here. But there still obviously remain a number of barriers, as well as a lack of institutional support for community engagement. Again, a lot of the community engagement work that we see was done by what we termed academic bricoleurs, those individual academics who are passionate about this and who drive the agenda forward with or without institutional support. And also a low level of government support as well within countries for developing greater collaboration between universities and communities. So if we could just move on to the partnerships slide, please, Hi. So again, we see that there was a strong focus on partnerships. We identified 220 partnerships. Again, partnerships with NGOs was a key focus. I think one of the positives that we found was that there was partnerships with other universities. We perhaps certainly didn't find that as much in the Hong Kong research. Universities, of course, are in competition with each other, so it was quite heartening to see a relatively decent proportion of partnerships between universities and also with the community. And really, partnerships are a great way for us to be able to develop not just research opportunities, but to actually develop meaningful teaching and learning opportunities for our students, and actually to deliver real world impact through the work that we do. But partnerships are underpinned by trust. And again, you can see here from the table that there were certain problem areas in terms of trust between academics and other members of society. Encouragingly, we see relatively high levels of trust in terms of with the actual partners that they have existing with their own higher education institutions, and in terms of civil society and other universities. But we see relatively low levels of trust, particularly with politics and political parties and politicians. That probably didn't surprise me too much. I would say that there's a relatively low level of trust in politicians globally at the moment anyway. I know there certainly is in the UK. But actually only very medium levels of trust as well with local and national government. And when we're looking to see greater partnership work and funding from those sources, that is going to hinder the development of such work in the future. And finally, key challenges. What we did is we amalgamated all of the academics were free to identify every area that they thought was a challenge, and we amalgamated that across the 5 countries into this bar chart, which I think kind of easily shows you where the main challenges lie, particularly around funding and HR, but also policy frameworks, and as we talked about earlier, the ability to develop innovative curriculum and the support that we that academics interested in this area get from senior management. I think quite positively we see relatively low levels of challenge around networking, student employability and personal agency. So I think there's actually these great networks in place within some countries. It's just actually taking it to the next level by providing them with that institutional support. So if we move on to the last 2 slides around the recommendations. So actually, if you read the regional report, there's 9 recommendations in total. I've condensed them just to 7 here, just for expediency. But the first recommendation is really focused very much on how we drive community engagement and that embedded place-based research and teaching that we talked about. As we've said, research and teaching should be embedded within communities, and they should be co-designed and collaborative projects. I know at the University of Northampton we're very keen to ensure that students can engage in placements in the community when they're doing their studies, so they can develop real-world ideas, solutions and thinking. We'd love to see greater collaboration between universities and NGOs. As much as that's a key feature at the moment, there's a real opportunity to drive growth there, both with local, national and international NGOs. The second recommendation is really focused around teaching competency and capacity building. Now, this is obviously a new area. We see relatively low levels of satisfaction with the quality of the curricula that's on offer, but some of that is actually to do with how well trained academics and empowered academics feel to be able to deliver this innovative teaching. If you've been engaged in lecture-based teaching all of your life, it's obviously a bit out of your comfort zone to suddenly be working in much more innovative forms of teaching. So education programs such as those run by the British Council are key there. I think higher education, strategic engagement with social innovation at an institutional level and how that plays out into career tracks is really important. At the moment, we see too many career tracks where tenure is absolutely focused on how many 4-star journal publications that you can produce, when actually we should also be looking at, well, maybe it's a 2 or 3-star piece of work in terms of academic quality, but look at this fantastic impact it's delivered in alleviating poverty or promoting gender equality, for instance. So I think understanding that, and I know that in Indonesia that's actually a key feature of tenure tracks, so maybe Ari will be able to talk a little bit about that later. I think it's a really important area though. That's how we can encourage and drive behaviour amongst a wider group of academics. And also national and global HI partnerships and benchmarking. Again, the focus in terms of international university rankings at the moment is all about research quality in those 4-star publications, but we're starting to see a shift away from that with recognition of the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals and things like the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings, where they actually rank universities based upon the impact of the work that they do. I think that's a really, really positive area, and Northampton will be entering that in January for the latest annual rankings for that. We see it as a key area to align with our SDG work. And if we just move on to the final recommendations slide, you'll see the last 3 recommendations. So we really would love to see an embedding of social innovation across all academic disciplines. There still is too much of a bias for social innovation to be wrapped around social enterprise work, and therefore it ends up in business schools. And actually, you know, there's a great desire and need for social innovation research and teaching in health, in science, in education, across all of the different disciplines that we would see within universities. And that really does come down again to the accreditation and the curricula and the funding streams as well, recognition of this type of work through the funding streams. Cross-sector partnerships are also massively important. How do we actually not just have universities working with NGOs in the community, but actually utilising the resources of corporates, bringing in the government, bringing in private, small and medium enterprises, you know, lots and lots of different stakeholders. Social innovations are normally very, very dependent on a wide stakeholder grouping, and that's how you drive the most impactful innovations. So really important for us to see that. And then increasing use of incubators within universities to support social innovation ideas, whether they turn into businesses or other types of programme or service beyond that. And finally, perhaps the most tricky area, the definition around social innovation. This is not something that's been cracked in the academic sphere by any means. And I must confess that when I hear people start talking about the definitional issue at conferences, my eyes somewhat start to glaze over. But it is an important area, because if we can't define what we mean by social innovation, then it's very difficult for us to drive that. But I think rather than trying to identify global definitions of innovation, it's actually about understanding what social innovation means in the local context. And that could mean very different things, not just between countries, but actually within countries in different regions. So I think for individual universities to decide what they see as social innovation and use that definition to drive forward behaviour is really a really positive aspect. So, I mean, that's everything from me in terms of the findings. If you can just move on to the last slide, please. Hi, thank you. That just contains my details. Please do feel free to email me if you have any questions or you want to talk to me about any of the work. You can also follow us on Twitter at that handle. We also have a website that's listed there, and you can also engage with a podcast that we have where we talk about social innovation with key social innovators every couple of months. So thank you so much for your time. It's great to see such a fantastic interest in social innovation across the region, and I'll hand back to Tristan.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Richard. And thank you very much also for keeping to the time that was allotted to you. Now, we have one question which sort of chimed with me. I won't ask you to answer it now, but I'll give you some time to think about it whilst the other presenters are responding. But it's and I think you kind of ducked it in the last recommendation by basically saying that social innovation is it's up to individual universities to decide what it is. But there's a question here which is asking us to oh, it's just gone. But I think if I can try to paraphrase it, it was around what are some of the key ingredients that need to be included in social innovation research or teaching for it to constitute the use of that term social innovation. So is there any sort of, perhaps we may not be able to give it a definition, but are there some key ingredients that we would say, well, that's yes, that counts as social innovation? It'd be great to get your thoughts on that one at the end, once we've had a chance to hear from our respondents. But thank you once again, Richard, for that introduction. Okay, brilliant. So now I'm going to hand over to our 5 respondents, and we've invited our 5 respondents from each of the 5 countries to share some of their initial reflections on the research in their specific country studies, as well as give some of how those findings and how those recommendations are reflected from what they see on the ground in their work. So I'm going to start off by inviting Pamela from MAGIC, from the Malaysia Global Innovation and Creativity Centre to kick us off. So Pamela, over to you.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here today. I'm representing MAGIC, an agency under the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. Our call here is really to provide capacity building opportunities to both startups and social enterprises. At the same time, we also build the ecosystem by providing them the access to capital and market. So on the findings from the report, I think for us, we find it pretty spot on, and it's very aligned with what we see down on the ground as well. Today, I'd like to pan into the recommendations and certain areas that requires further research, mainly on the strategic partnership bit where we at MAGIC, this is what we do as well a lot, because we realize with limited funding, it's really important to bring in really good like-minded partners to actually spread the social innovation knowledge. So I think a key findings from our side is that the alignment or understanding about social innovation, and we think it's important to really raise the awareness, because we think in this part of the world, social innovation, social entrepreneurship is still pretty nascent. So I think just to give an example of how we try to raise awareness amongst the university students is that we recently partner with Sunway University, where we actually launched it's a university challenge focusing on social innovation. And how we're doing differently this time is we are actually bringing in our alumni of social enterprises, where they are actually sponsoring problem statements, where they, throughout the challenge, the students can actually work on real problems, real social problems, where they can actually immerse themselves, be involved, and really have that first-hand experience to understand what are the problems down on the ground and together with the social enterprises, they can actually devise the solution together to help them scale their impact. And we think through this, it actually gives the students actually, the opportunity to actually recognize if they have the potential to be social innovators themselves, to be part of the social entrepreneurship space to do good for the community. So This is one of our initiative here. And on top of that, I think leading on from the findings from the research, we believe that building a pipeline of new social innovators in years to come, especially with the impact of COVID, is very, very important. So we're glad that recently that we've reached out to the Ministry of Higher Education in Malaysia and partnering with key universities here to work on and curate a program that can actually enhance social innovation and social entrepreneurship concept amongst students in universities nationwide in Malaysia. So the program will actually focus a lot on curating modules or curriculum that help lecturers understand the notion of social innovation. And we totally agree that it should be put in the context of the country that we are in, because with limited funding, we think that we should really focus on material social challenges so that resource can be allocated more efficiently. So it will be part of this program that, it's a journey to really identify what are the key areas as a country we want to focus on. And then the lecturers would have an understanding on what, why, who, and how in this space, and what are the key tools required to help seed social innovation and even inspire students to be social enterprises. So and we really, we agree with the importance of embedding modules that allow students to immerse in the experience to better understand what are social challenges down on the ground. So with this program in mind, we are right now targeting how we can actually help the lecturers understand better so that they can go back to the respective university and actually spread that knowledge back to the student. Yep, I think that's all for me.
Fantastic, thank you, Pamela. And I didn't mention, if I can remind our respondents to stick to 5 minutes so we can get enough time for a conversation afterwards, but that's brilliant. You kept the time regardless, so thank you very much for that. Let's move on then to the Philippines, and I'm going to invite Professor Edwin Salonga to provide your initial reflections.
Thank you very much, Tristan. I would like to thank the British Council for inviting me to this regional launch event. It's actually very nice to be reconnected with you all. I consider it a great honor and privilege to be among you here to tackle the current issues, status, and possible ways forward to advance social innovation in higher education. At SEDP, where I work, we provide technical and financial support to select social enterprises here in the Philippines. And at the Ateneo de Manila University, where I teach, there are courses and initiatives that focus on social innovation and entrepreneurship. The research study commissioned by the British Council is both timely and relevant. The resulting country report provides an updated overview of the landscape of social innovation in the Philippines. Indeed, higher education institutions play a vital role in ensuring that there is progress in social innovation research, teaching engagement. The main findings reflect the current ecosystem of social innovation in the country. Delve on institutional and systemic reforms. Based on the said country report, I would like to highlight key insights as points for further reflection. First, there needs to be more support in the conduct of meaningful research and extension services. Second, collaborations are important to ensure alignment among research, teaching, and community engagement on social innovation. And third, higher education institutions may serve as local champions in advocating for reforms. As regards the conduct of meaningful research and extension services, support may come in the form of funding, capacity building, networking, and knowledge sharing. Aside from funding, non-financial resources will help a lot in ensuring that practitioners and educators are able to understand the needs and aspirations of the individuals and organizations that work in this field of social innovation. Through research and extension services, we will be able to document good practices and lessons learned in the field. We can share such in various platforms, both online or otherwise. There is also much value in collaborative efforts to ensure alignment among research, teaching, and community engagement on social innovation and entrepreneurship. This applies not only between higher education institutions and local communities. More importantly, multi-stakeholder approach allows for the active engagement of the government, civil society, and the private sector, among others. we must not forget that the end view of such collaboration is to achieve equitable and sustainable development, especially for those who are vulnerable and marginalized, so that we don't leave anyone behind. In advocating for pragmatic, institutional, and systemic reforms, there is a need for local champions, and higher education institutions may well serve as the binding force to advance positive changes in the social innovation ecosystem. Individual academicians and practitioners in higher education institutions may create a multiplier effect, which expands the positive effects of social innovation to reach greater numbers of people, communities, and organizations. Given their innate credibility, higher education institutions are in a good position to bring about meaningful impact. To conclude, let me reiterate the three key insights I discussed. 1, support the conduct of meaningful research and extension services. 2, collaborate to ensure alignment among research, teaching, and community engagement. And 3, use higher education institutions as champions for pragmatic, institutional, and systemic reforms. In SEDP and in Ateneo de Manila University, we combine both the academe and practice in our development work. Thank you, and I look forward to further opportunities in advancing social innovation, not only in the Philippines, but also beyond. Thank you, Tristan.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Edwin, and thanks again for your absolute clarity with those really concise points you're making there. And we look forward to working with you to help achieve those in the future. So let's head over to Vietnam now, and I'm going to invite Professor Lam to share her reflections from the Vietnamese context. So Professor Lam, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kristen. I would like to share my reflection on the recommendation that we sent by the Richard about the definition of social innovation related to Professor Edwin said that don't leave anyone behind in the field of social innovation. So according to the finding from the country report from Vietnam, I totally agree with the finding that in Vietnam now social innovation is poorly understood, while social enterprise has received more attention. Actually, there is a popular understanding that social innovation usually end up in social enterprise. So therefore, when promote social innovation, the policy or other stakeholder always focus on the field of business or economics from the sector of higher education. But for me, as a top leader of the University of Social Science and Humanity, we think that social innovation is the need, the solution for making the change for our university and also for the society in general. I think that social innovation can understand that this is a new practice that's used to tackle social challenges and bring the positive influence on individual, society, or organization. So that's why we, I think that social innovation will make a very big and wide change to the society. So therefore, our university, we choose innovation or creativity as the one of the core value of our university. We hope that this is the solution for our university in order to embrace the challenge and the change of the present situation. And therefore, during last time, we have a great effort to increase the awareness of social innovation among our students and our faculty. In any kind of activity within the university, for example, giving a talk or any activity, we always convey the message, social innovation is a need. And it's a solution for the development of the university and the society. So we, besides convey the message to the students to raise the awareness, we also arrange some activity like Pamela has informed. We also invite the alumni to give a talk to our students. And also, when we have something new about the social innovation, we will transfer to our faculty. So we think that they will develop the idea. And in general, I think that we can social innovation can start at a micro or a bottom-up level, and it is more effective in the case of my university. And as a leader, I need to create the environment and the framework for social innovation to be heard, to be implemented. And during last time, I think that raising awareness is very important, because we have a lot of students, a lot of faculty, so we have a lot of ideas. So raising awareness, and we prove by our actions so that they can follow, or they can create new idea for the society or for their daily activity. And I think the most important thing is to raise awareness of the leader at various levels, because they control the resources and they know the resources to how to facilitate the social innovation. And if they have a full awareness of the need of the social innovation, they become the key actor to facilitate the need of social innovation at large. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Professor Lan. The issue of top-down versus bottom-up social innovation is one that I think is really interesting to explore further. And your point around the need for bottom-up social innovation is really valid and well heard, I think. So now I'm going to move over to Korea, and I'm going to invite Professor Ji-Hwan Lee for his reflections.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for having me today. And I was very delighted to read the report on social innovation, I mean the higher education and social innovation, and naturally I paid more attention to the report on Korea, and I would say this might be the first comprehensive report on this topic in this country. And let me touch upon three dimensions: government and university and companies, large private companies. First of all, I was quite astonished with the low trust level on other stakeholders. I mean, one of the pages of the report showed the result of survey, and in general, the Korean scholars had a relatively lower level of trust on other stakeholders, especially a parliament and legal system and kind of dimensions. And this might be sort of the result of a nationality bias, but anyway, you know, still in Korea, the government plays a huge role in this movement towards social innovation or social change, especially in this progressive or liberal administration. I'm sure that the huge budget is invested in that dimension, but still I feel that kind of mechanism or process is not that effective or efficient. Maybe, and one of the key reasons of the kind of disappointing progress might be the people in the government or people in the politics still think they are sort of patrons or sponsors of this change rather than the players or actors themselves. So by that way, you know, the players in the private sector or in the younger generation, they are very much dependent on that kind of, you know, fundings or networking by the administrative government or the parliament kind of things. So in that way, I think we need to somehow incentivize incentivize the people in the government or in politics, so that they can actually participate in this process more voluntarily or more progressively. And second, in terms of university, I mean, moving on to the university side, first, in terms of research, I think, there's huge pressure these days towards the academics to publish in top journals these days. So I think still the topics in social innovation might be very difficult. I mean, for the academic researchers, it is very difficult to publish, the top journal papers with that sort of research topics these days. It might be, different from area to area, but for example, my area, the business management, still I feel very difficult to publish in top journals with any topics in social innovation or social change. So for that reason, I think, we need to think more. We need to be more open. The academic society needs to be more open to the topics that are very important for our future, rather than the current conversations in the academic societies. And one of the key roles, that can be played by the university or academic institutions might be the measurement of social values or measurement of social innovation kind of things. And by that way, actually, we can contribute to a more progressive or more systematic progress in promoting social innovation or social entrepreneurship kind of things. And lastly, actually, I'm a director of social entrepreneurship MBA in KAIST Business School, and this program is fully supported by SK Group, which is one of the largest business groups in Korea. And that kind of collaboration between universities and large companies might be very important. And if I have time a little bit later, then I can add more about this later on. Okay, thank you. That's it from me.
Thank you very much indeed, Professor Lee. And I think that question around the alignment of academics on the one hand being driven by their academic performance and journal publication, and on the other a desire to achieve social impact was one of the key findings from the report, and how and it's quite interesting to see some of the developments that we're seeing around how research impact and the social impact of research is now being given a greater score in university evaluations, and how that is increasingly becoming an issue, a policy issue, which is demanding and encouraging academics to create more social value with their research. But a key finding from the report was around that issue. Excellent. So let's move on then to Dr. Ari Magiano from Indonesia. So your reflections, please.
Thank you, Tristan, and thank you, British Council, for inviting Venus University to collaborate on this project. Venus University has been teaching social innovation to our students, actually, including to master's students, to MBA students, as they have to take social innovation camps that we facilitate every year as part of the curriculum. So social innovation is something that is familiar for Venus University. This is going to be an important sector, I guess, especially with the COVID-19 impact. There's going to be a lot of social innovation that we have to do in Indonesia. But social innovation teaching and research, as we found out from our survey and qualitative research, is actually on its nascent stage. But what interesting is actually that within this nascent stage of social entrepreneurship in Indonesia, or social innovation in Indonesia, academics are quite resilient, if you will, and that's what I'm going to focus on this particular sharing, actually. That a lot of social innovation academics are actually social innovators themselves and social entrepreneurs themselves. So basically, they are what we call as practitioner academics, a combination between being practitioner and being academics. As for academics, many of the academics are actually entrepreneurial, and in some cases they'd be able to actually change the system. They would be able to push to extend the boundary of the system, to change rigid higher education institution system. For example, one of our respondents actually developed a community outside the campus, and this community becoming very vibrant. A lot of students are actually there promoting social innovation, and the university is actually slowly recognizing the community, and they work together and they change the system from bottom-up processes. So this is pretty much like what Richard mentioned earlier about community engagement and fostering social innovation and social entrepreneurship in the higher education institution in Indonesia. In fact, from our data, from our interview, the community seems to become a catalyst, an important catalyst that changed the university structure, changed the bureaucracy at the university, although it happens quite slowly. One of our respondents mentioned that he and the community had to do canvassing, had to convince a lot of university officials, to the department heads, to deans, to make sure that social innovation, teaching and research can be implemented or can be applied in their department. So buy-in from other education institution officials are taken place because of this community and the socially innovative academics, if you will. But our data is also showing that although this is exciting and there are a lot of similar academics, if you will, in other universities that we are focusing or we're studying, there are limits to that, because the structure, the boundaries within the university can be very strong and can be very discouraging, if you will, because a lot of things. For example, in many interviews in the report, you can download the report after this launch from the link that British Council provided. Many respondents said that the academics needs to face rigid university bureaucracy, and it's quite difficult for them to expand the social innovativeness that they've already done. So that the university bureaucracy sometimes becomes a barrier that drains their energy, and it becomes very difficult for them to create impact in the society. So these conditions actually create a pressing needs, if you will, to change the way in which university operates, to change the way in which higher education institution in Indonesia operates, if you will. We recommend two important things. First of all, the silo mentalities among the academics needs to be broken down. So higher education institutions should facilitate cross-fertilization between different departments, between different academics who are focusing on different disciplines, because social innovation is actually a multidisciplinary thing. And the second thing is that in some example where cross-fertilization is successful, there is sometimes, or there is a center or an organization or a unit, if you will, within the organization, within the higher education institution, that helps to cross-fertilize different academics. So you need basically a facilitation from the higher education institution to make sure that the silo mentalities are broken down, if you will. Thank you very much for that.
Great, thank you very much indeed, Ari. Okay, brilliant. So huge insights there from our 5 panelists, and now's an opportunity to hear from some of the people and some of the questions that were raised before the webinar, and some that have been published in the chat function on Teams. What I've attempted to do is to group them, and because some of the questions have emerged around similar themes. And what I will do is I'll invite each of our panelists to choose one or two of the questions that they think is most interesting for them or most relevant for them to respond to. But I might just summarize the questions now as briefly as I can, because we haven't got a huge amount of time left for the Q&A session. So the first question was quite a straightforward one, which is around how you engage students in this when perhaps they're not that interested. So how do you engage students to become more interested in social innovation? The second question, I think, which might be interesting from your perspective, Edwin, particularly, and there's a relevant question in the chat box around, which is how you turn these businesses or the incubation facilities in universities into real, properly functioning enterprises, and also there's a question more specifically around the finance and how you can attract finance to these enterprises as well. All kinds of issues around IP there, which I think which we identified in the report, and how you might do that. The third question's around community engagement, CSOs, and how you can engage NGOs, CSOs more effectively within the universities. And you talked again around having there are some insights there around the universities being pillars within communities and how they can play that role more effectively as well. There's a question related to how you teach this, how social innovation is helping to innovate around teaching, particularly given the shift to online. So what examples can we learn from social innovation in that regard? And then there's a final question, which I think is relevant, particularly from a British Council perspective, around building international collaborations as well. So there's sort of 5 groupings of questions there. And there's also one specific question here from somebody in the chat box, which I will just raise, from the director of the Social Innovation Center Foundation University in the Philippines, which is any tips for a newly opened social innovation center? Many of you work in these centers that have been in existence for some time now. So what tips would you give to somebody just starting one of these centers up? Now, we've got 14 minutes left, which means 5 speakers. That's about 2 minutes, 50 seconds each. I will go to you, Richard, to kick us off. You are mute.
Sorry. I was just saying that's good maths, Tristan, working out the exact slot. Impressive on the hop. Perhaps I'll take the last one then, around how we, how do you take forward developing a newly open centre? Just because I can think back to the context that at my own research centre that was established in 2014. And really at the time, we started a research institute, the Institute for Social Innovation, which sounded all very grand, but effectively it was just myself. It was just me. So it was a very sort of grand title for me, but we had to drive that forward. We had to make it sustainable. We had to engage in research partnerships and income. And how did we do that? Really by networking furiously, really, to engage multiple partners from social innovators and social entrepreneurs through to government, academic funders, you name it. And in doing that, we were able to open up a variety of different funding streams, which allowed us the opportunity to engage in quite innovative research. We were able to pull in students from teaching courses to work with us on that research. We were able to have policy and practical impacts that we could then develop as case studies to further network and really embed our reputation in the field. And really it was that wider stakeholder engagement, and I sort of alluded to it in the presentation earlier around the importance of multi-stakeholder collaborations, that allowed us to really drive the growth of the research centre to the point that we now have 7 postdocs working with us, 9 PhD students and a couple of visiting fellows. So we were able to traction quite a lot of growth there. And I think it's a recognition that you can't just focus in these types of centres. You can't just focus on one thing. You have to, research is important, teaching is important, but that practitioner and that community engagement aspect is absolutely critical for you to be taken seriously as a social innovation, a hub or centre for social innovation. So it really is it's that multi-stakeholder networking that I think is absolutely critical for that question about how you take forward a newly open centre.
Great, thanks, Richard. I'll move on swiftly. Edwin, so we'll move on to Pamela. Sorry, to kick off. We'll follow the same order as before. Sorry, but Pamela will kick off with you.
Yep. So I just pick any question to answer?
Yep.
Yep. So there's one question on recommendation from funders to engage more meaningfully with social innovators. I think here in Magic, we believe that it's very important to align the interests between funders and social innovators. So, for example, what we would do is we push for a corporate social innovation initiative in the sense that we're promoting like-minded corporates that wants to embed social innovation as in their business as usual. And what we do is we connect our alumni of existing social innovators to them in the sense that it's more of a collaborative partnership with corporates having skin in the game, and we think that they are actually more willing to invest their capital in the social innovators. Yep, that's from me.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yep.
And perhaps it's a good segue then into you, Edwin, to follow on from that conversation and how you engage corporates and private capital and how you grow enterprises that you incubate within universities.
Exactly. So I would like just to echo first what my colleagues mentioned earlier, that in terms of funding and resources, there must be some complementation of resources together with like-minded organizations and institutions. And this is important so that we are able to use scarce resources in a more efficient way. But at the same time, we need to show proof of concept first. And in this regard, I believe that documentation of good practices and lessons learned are important. For example, in the Ateneo de Malaya University, we actually invest on documenting good case studies on social innovation and entrepreneurship so that it can be shared across various levels, not only locally, but also abroad. As you mentioned, Tristan, it is important to also have a regional collaboration, and this can only happen if we show that there are really good cases that can be shared at the regional level. So those two main points.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's move then over to Professor Lan in Vietnam. And perhaps that first question was around, and this is something you raised, around how you can encourage students to engage in the social innovation agenda.
Yes, thank you very much. For the student and also the question related to the social teaching in social innovation. As you know, for higher education, the students have a lot to study because it is a requirement for them in order to graduate. So that's why for social innovation, I think that we cannot put into the official curriculum. So that's why in my case of my university, I organize the activity as the extracurriculum activity for the student to engage in the social innovation. The first, and the second is in any kind of message to the student and the faculty or the lecturer, I always convey the message of social innovation is the tendency and also is a need for, especially for the people from the field of social science, that they are always sensitive with the social challenges and social problem. So that's why the way I engage students into the social innovation, that is to the convey the message and to encourage them in any talk I give to them, and also to the lecturer, because they are directly connected to directly communicate with the student, and also to the extracurriculum activity. For example, we annually we organize a contest for our students to formulate the idea, so that we can have a bank of ideas in order to collaborate with other students from other universities, for example, from the technology university, so that they can get a startup. So that is we at the beginning state that to raise the awareness to convey the message, and also to the activity, so that they can actively aware that the need of the social innovation in their daily practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lam. So let's move then on to Korea and to Professor Siwan Lee again. Now, you gave some great examples of collaborations with the private sector. Perhaps that would be an interesting question for your reflections on there, is how universities can actually incubate or build businesses, and what are some of the issues and challenges and how you overcome that?
Actually, I mean, this might be a perspective from a business school professor, but anyway, I mean, the initiatives or motivations for social innovation is quite similar to those for the entrepreneur success. Every organization must have a good mission or a good purpose. And these days, many, smart entrepreneurs are trying to establish their own startups based on their social missions as well. And in that way, I think if we want to those new startups to be successful, we need to relate those entrepreneurs with technology, and those technologies come from research labs in universities, and also can come from private companies as well. So by coordinating that kind of resources here and there, I think we can encourage our students' efforts to establish new startups, or to lead to the social innovation as well. So by that way, I think, the role of a university could be something like the hub of entrepreneurial innovation, and that entrepreneurial innovation is not only for the for-profit organization, for-profit companies. It could be also for non-profit organizations, and so the role of universities could be quite diverse in that way. So that's our approach, and the resources can come from anywhere in the world, I think. Okay, that's it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. Now, let's go on to Dr. Ari Majiano from Indonesia. Now, I think we've covered most of the questions here, but the one that perhaps we could perhaps do a bit more interest from, I think this might be relevant for you, Ari, is the question around engagement with communities, and how you can engage both communities and civil society organizations more broadly in the work of social innovation within universities. Something that Edwin touched on a bit there, with the idea of universities playing this sort of championing role within communities.
Okay, thanks for that, Kristen. I think we've heard a lot about engagement of university with communities from our data, from our interviews, and also from the survey. And many of them are actually placing university as an important hub, if you will, for social innovation activities. So the example that I mentioned earlier is basically highlighting the example, or highlighting the case where university becomes an important hub for communities and for stakeholders, particularly social stakeholders in this case, to work together with students, to create projects together, to develop activities together, and to create something that is impactful for society together. So the bottom line here is actually making universities to become a hub for this kind of activities, for social innovation and social impact activities. In fact, in Venus itself, I mentioned earlier that we've done a lot of social innovation camps activities. We actually work with a lot of non-government organizations, with foundations, and with non-profit sectors, even with social enterprises as well, to help our students to develop some sort of solutions to the problems that the societies are actually facing in this case. So again, going back to the question, the important part in engaging with community is making universities to become hubs for social innovation. Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you very much, Ari. Brilliant. So thank you very much for all of your reflections there. I hope that we've covered most of the questions that have been posed. There's one final question here from an anonymous person, although it's a very good one. So I'm going to just reframe it now, and then I'm going to hand over to our regional director Andrew Parman for his final thoughts on what he's heard so far. But perhaps, Andrew, I could also ask you to reflect on this final question too, which is how do we think we might take some of these recommendations forward? What opportunities are there for cross-sector networks, working groups, and that kind of thing as well? So perhaps your thoughts too, Andrew, on what some of the next steps might be as well. So thanks again to our panelists. We'll come back to say thank you to finish, but we're going to hand over to Andrew now for some reflections.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Pleasure to be here to speak to you today. First of all, before I give my final thoughts, I'd like to thank all of the speakers from the Philippines, from South Korea, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, and from Vietnam, and also our colleagues from Northampton who put the report together. I think that this has been a really comprehensive review of the social innovation and teaching landscape. I think what came across really clearly was some of the needs for applied impact-led research, and it's a growing area. Some of the huge impacts that social innovation teaching can make for citizenship and engagement for the next generation. The importance of embedding research and teaching within the university systems. Some of the partnerships that are emerging around NGOs, schools, public bodies, and the role of engaging with communities, as well as some of the support systems that exist for those partnerships to happen. I think also that there was some interesting thoughts around the need to co-design programming and social innovation approaches with communities. The idea that education, that there needs to be more of a career track for academics engaged in social innovation to involve themselves in practice and engagement with the communities themselves, as well as just publishing in academic journals, which can sometimes be a little bit abstract. And I was really struck in some of the comments around the needs for cross-sectoral partnerships, meaningful collaborations, and the potential role for higher education institutions to be local champions for social innovation. I think some of the points around social innovation being a way of tackling marginalization is going to be really, really important, as is building in some of the social innovations that will be needed to tackle responses and social responses to COVID, and how that affects the future of work of communities and the role of universities within the societies in which they operate. I was also struck by some of the comments around the need to engage more with both government and with companies, and this idea that government doesn't always need, and leaders do not always need to be patrons, but they really need to work to be enablers of change. And I thought that was something that was quite important. I think that this area around the pracademic is going to be really, really important. And I think in answer to your question on ways forward, I think it's really about how we can facilitate the engagement of academics and with practice, and how we can really engage with communities so that they can be the catalyst of change. So it doesn't just come from academics or come from governments, but that change and innovation can come from the communities. And we can look at the role that higher education institutions can play in that. And I think that one of the areas that could be quite ripe for further collaboration is this idea that came from a couple of the speakers around the university really being able to act as a hub for social engagement, and that being a way that communities themselves can engage in social innovation and social innovation practice. And I think that an organisation such as the British Council that has linkages to academic institutions, linkages to communities, and linkages with government can work with higher education institutions to be able to develop some of these hub approaches. So I think that this is a really exciting area to engage with, and I look forward to working with all of you and in the countries of operation in the future, especially as we look to work with higher education institutions for the future of engagement around social innovation and the benefit that can bring to communities. So thank you all very much for your participation, and also to the over 160 participants who have been engaged to listen to your thoughts and insights. So thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Now, fantastically, we still have just under 5 minutes. I think the one thing about doing things virtually is it forces us to be much better timekeepers, and so we've done a great job today, so thank you very much. I'm going to invite our speakers for a final action that they're going to take, or that they would like to see taken as a result of the findings and recommendations from these reports. I'm going to give them just about 20 seconds each. I'm going to start with you, Edwin, because you responded saying to my WhatsApp message just now when I asked everyone that, and so it seems like you have something to say, and that'll give others just a chance to think about what that action is going to be. So Edwin, over to you.
Sure. As an action point, I would just recommend to find, explore, and collaborate. Find like-minded organizations, explore possible actions, and then later on collaborate with them. That's it.
Thanks, Edwin. Pamela, perhaps I can come to you.
Sure, I guess apart from finding the right partners, maybe it's time to really think of the areas that you want to focus on as well, because there are limited resources. Yep.
Great. Okay, thank you. Let's go to Shiwan Lee, Professor Lee from Korea, for any final actions off the back of the recommendations.
As a researcher and teacher, I think every effort of mine should be more, field-based, right, rather than paper-based.
So
that's it.
Practice is key.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's challenging, but I think we need to move towards that side. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. And let's go then to Professor Lan from Vietnam. What action would you like to see happen to grow this agenda in Vietnam?
I think that we need to know more about the social innovation, because social innovation, as I wish, it can be everyday practice, not just end up in social enterprise as we realize now. And social innovation can be started at the bottom level. Thank you.
So greater awareness of the term social innovation, moving away from its association with social enterprise only, and also bottom-up social innovation to be promoted as well. Thank you for that. And let's move then to Ari, to Indonesia.
Yeah, I think what's important is actually to have a lot of conversation between a lot of universities, with many universities in Indonesia, so that we can create an enabling environment for pre-academics, creating a good, how do you say that, a good home for them. So we need to start talking to different universities and start collaborating between different universities, not competing, but collaborating to create a safe space for this pre-academics.
Thank you, and that's certainly something in the British Council we'll be trying to look at how we can encourage more regional collaborations, and of course collaborations with universities in the UK as well. And Richard, I'll give the last word to you. What key action would you like to see? If of all the recommendations, is there one that you think is the most important?
No, I mean, I agree with everything that all the speakers have said. Probably the last one for me would be, I would really like to see a regional education programme for institutional leaders. I think what we've seen in the research is it's a key, institutional resistance is a key barrier here, and I think that getting the senior decision makers in universities to really understand the value of social innovation would be a massively powerful thing and would tie into that kind of regional collaboration that Ari just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there was one question around regional networks in the field, in this particular field. And of course, there are many networks that exist around related fields, but there was, of course, a network that was established by Glasgow Caledonian University as part of the Social Innovation in Southeast Asia Network Programme. I'm not sure if anybody from Glasgow is on this webinar. That was focused just on Southeast Asia, but I think that there was an opportunity to perhaps strengthen or work with that network as well, to think about how we can achieve that outcome, Richard. So thanks for that. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the webinar. I should just say once again, thank you so much to all of our contributors for giving their time this afternoon and for your fantastic insights. So thank you once again for joining us this afternoon, and to all of our participants as well. Thank you. I think as Andrew said, over 160 people joined us today, which I think is testament to the interest in this agenda. We'll be looking at how these recommendations will inform our programming in the British Council, so please watch this space for future programming in the intersection between social innovation and higher education. And finally, my final housekeeping task is to remind everybody to complete the post-conference evaluation survey, which will be, the link is in the Q&A box, and it will also be sent to you if you provided your email address when we send you the report as well. So it'd be great to get some feedback on this webinar too. So it leaves me to say thank you very much again for everyone joining us, and enjoy the rest of your evening if you are in East Asia, afternoon if you're in South Asia, and morning if you are in Europe or the UK. So thanks once again, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.